Hey everyone, Matt from Close Books here. I hope that the start of 2026 has gone well for you so far. I hope that hopefully you got a break. I hope the break over the new year was relaxing, restorative. I got to read a bunch of good books, and I hope that this transition back to real life and work and all that nonsense isn't too harsh, isn't too turbulent. I wanted to make maybe a little bit more of an impromptu video talking about some really big books that I want to read, like really enormous books. This is partly in response to my last video where I talked about kind of reframing my relationship with reading, where I just read the books I really want to read or really alluring to me, rather than checking off books from a list that I feel like I should read. Part of that is me realizing that I just like to read bigger books. I like to get lost in a narrative, in a story. I like to really connect with the characters, kind of see them grow or move through these themes or go through character arcs. And I like to see how a big book can kind of tie a bunch of themes together in a thoughtful way. To me, that's very impressive and really rewarding as a reader to kind of see it all unfold. Often at times I just find it more fun to analyze a big book. You have more things to analyze, which kind of works with my research brain. So I thought I'd talk. I'm working from home today. I thought I'd take my lunch break and talk about some books that I've been wanting to read. Some really big books. Part of this reframing of my reading is a lot of it is being less of like a consumer mindset, less of the read more books, you have to read more and more kind of just like having fulfilling reading experiences. And I think in the past, having a more of a numbers goal kind of not prohibited me, or made me reluctant to tackle bigger books because I felt like I had to get down the list. That's what this video is about. It's about exploring the options of these books that have always sounded alluring to me, and just kind of like celebrating like the celebration of possibilities, all these enormous books that I can get lost in and not really worry about a reading goal or a numbers goal. I should say that my definition of a big book is over 600 pages. At first I was thinking over 700, but then we would have excluded spiritually, we'd have excluded Moby Dick from the list, and I don't know if I can have that on my conscience. So over 600 pages is the cutoff for a big book. And in this video, I'm going to offer a smattering of different over 600 page books. Hopefully you haven't heard of some of them. Hopefully some of them interest you. I'm also not saying that I'm going to read all these books this year. Hell no. But it's more like I said, it's a celebration of options. Currently I'm reading 3 books, like 3 proper big books. And I'll tell you about them at the end of the list. Okay, first off, I think I just start off big. I should just start off with a bang, right? This one I'm doubtful I'll get to this year, but you know what, maybe I will. This is a book I've been interested in for the past maybe 2 or 3 years, based off of its concept and the author. And I heard about it here on YouTube, on BookTube, and let me get it. Careful, there that goes. And that book is Miss Macintosh, My Darling, Miss Macintosh, My Darling by Marguerite Young. That's probably why I said Garling, because Marguerite. So if you don't know about this book, it is I think it's 12 or 1300 pages. It's a 1300 page book, mostly surrounding a bus ride, a singular bus ride. And as far as I understand, it is well within the confines of one person's mind, her interpretations of all the people around her, and her internal dialogue. And that to me is incredibly interesting. 1300 pages inside one person's brain, inside one person's thoughts, reasoning, abstractions, really becoming intimate with a character. To me, that is incredibly interesting. As you guys know, I'm like really into stream of consciousness style writing. While I don't think this is that, I do think it is kind of along those lines of getting no threshold, no barrier between the character and the reader, which I really enjoy. I like those kinds of books. I like being able to think about and dissect things in the mind of the character or through the lens of the character's perceptions. Another thing that interests me about this book is the author, Marguerite Young. I believe, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this is her only proper novel. She is a poet. I know she's written some nonfiction, but she is a poet traditionally, and I think a huge chunky novel, a chunky narrative written by a poet, like with a poetic style of prose, to me is very enchanting. It's very alluring, and that is why this book has been on my list for a while. However, I mean, look at the damn thing. I feel like this is like someone like breaks into my house. It's like one of the first things I go for, or my replica of Sting up there. One of those two things would be my go-to. Weapons. Okay, so that's Miss Macintosh, My Darling by Marguerite Young. Funnily enough, I've been seeing this book at like my local Barnes and Noble, which I didn't think this was a book that you might be able to find at a Barnes and Noble, but here you go. Okay, this next book, much higher likelihood that I'm gonna get to this year. In fact, I think it might be the next proper big book that I start. And that book is A Naked Singularity by Sergio de la Pava. Now, I mean, first of all, look at this cover. I actually found this book at, again, my local Barnes & Noble. I got a real big Barnes & Noble gift card from my parents for Christmas. Thanks, Mom and Dad. I try to go to my local, like my locally owned bookstore as much as I can, but when you get a Barnes & Noble gift card, like, come on. And I saw this on the shelves. I didn't know anything about it. I think I had like loosely heard people talk about it, say they liked it, but I didn't really know anything about it, and I don't think I could recognize it by name. But I saw the spine, and I thought the spine looked really cool, and I picked it up. And the first page I found, this was on the page. And on bad nights like that night with Manos, you will scarcely have room to move, as a great many other bodies wait there with you, the cell walls straining against the immured humanity, the number of bodies held therein so great you would not think so many could simultaneously do wrong. Like, that was the first sentence I picked out of this book. I just opened a random page and read that, and I said, yeah, sure, I'll pick it up, whatever. I have since learned more about this book. It is about, from what I understand, a public defender in New York who has a perfect track record. He has never lost. And I guess a lot of this book is the main character's relationship with like the judicial system, maybe the failing, crushing pressures of the judicial system, and him kind of coping and, you know, reconciling that, I guess. That's about the extent of what I know about this book. On the back, it says, in the book, we watch what happens when his sense of justice and even his sense of self begin to crack, and how his world then slowly devolves. It's a huge, ambitious novel told in a distinct, frequently hilarious voice with a striking human empathy at its center. You guys know, empathy has been one of my driving forces for what I want to read these days. So this is basically, that back description is basically like a Colossum Books buzzword conglomerate. I don't know what I'm saying. That's the book I want to, that's the next book, big book I want to read, A Naked Singularity by Sergio de la Pava. So another really interesting book that I picked up, I picked this book up on a whim, and afterwards learned about its kind of like legendary cult status. I went to my local bookstore. I know about this author and I know about the publisher, but I didn't really know like the legendary status or cult following of this novel. And that book is Your Name Here by Helen DeWitt and Ilya Gridneff. Hopefully I'm saying that right, Gridneff. Helen DeWitt is the author of the book The Last Samurai, which is a cult favorite for a lot of people. Sorry, my cats know I'm recording, so they want to act up. And apparently this book took 20 years to write. And the co-author, funnily enough, Ilya Gridneff, is a journalist, and they wrote this book together. The interesting backstory about this book, and I apologize if I get this wrong. I read Sorry, he's dashing around. And I read this in an article, I believe by Celia Bell, who is also an author. I'll put the article down below. I didn't read the whole thing because I didn't want there to be any sort of spoilers in it because it starts going over the plot. But the article is very well written. It's very engaging. But the background of this novel is that Helen DeWitt took around 20 years to write it. And shopped it around to publishing houses, and pretty much every publishing house was like, this book is unpublishable. It is just too weird. The typesetting is going to be impossible. Sorry, we're not doing it. So what she then did after getting all these rejections was she published the PDF of the manuscript on her website, which people rushed to go get. And apparently people loved, like, it was like a cult following. People were like, this is a work of genius. This is a work of brilliance. I mean, if you look at the text, it's like emails, it's loose text, it's pictures, it's scripts. Like, look at this. Look at this. This is one big footnote here that has Arabic in it. From what I have gathered, which is not a lot, there are 3 subplots written about Helen DeWitt and Ilya Gridnev. Like, they're both characters within each subplot. However, formulated around these subplots are readers of the book. Like, you read about readers of the book who are, I guess, are not liking the book very much, but then are slowly becoming privy to the idea that they are also parts of the book. So it's very metafictional, it's very meta. And obviously hearing that, I think of If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino, which, to be honest, I didn't like love that book, to be honest. I thought it was pretty good. But I think in this like kind of 21st century setting, it takes 20 years to write. Something about that is very alluring to me. Also, I just kind of like picked it up on a whim and then learned about all this stuff later. And that story about the PDF is very engaging too. So very cool. That's Your Name Here. Wow, my cats are going crazy. Your Name Here by Helen DeWitt and Ilya Gridnev. The next book I don't have here. I have pre-ordered it. It hasn't gotten here yet. I think it releases in April. And that is The Tunnel by William Gass. Viewers of the channel will know that's been one of my white whale books. I've always wanted to read it, but didn't want to shell out the $100 or whatever to get a copy. Lo and behold, again, Dalkey Archive are re-releasing it in full color in April. And that I'm very, very excited about. So I pre-ordered this book about a year ago, but I've wanted to read it for much longer than that. What this book is about, it is about a history professor who is writing a history, I guess, textbook or just a history book about how Nazi Germany came to power. Like, what are all the events that led to the fascist regime in Germany to gain power? And as he's writing this book, he is noticing a lot of parallels within his own personal life. Like, a lot of these systemic parallels that mirror in his own personal life and his own family life. And he gets really bitter about it. There's an incredible interview between Michael Silverblatt and William Gass, the author of the novel, where they talk about the background of it, what led to it, and one thing that jumps out to me is the phrase "fascism of the heart." And as the author of the book in The Tunnel notices these parallels between, Nazi Germany and his own life, he starts to develop what he calls the fascism of the heart, which I think sounds very interesting. And there's Jericho. Hey, Jericho, want to say hi? The main character in the book, he starts to write about his personal life, these really bitter, really nasty musings and thoughts about his personal life. He starts to hide them in the manuscript of the history book he's reading. In parallel, he's also digging a physical tunnel under his house and shoving the dirt from the tunnel he's digging into the cabinets and the drawers of his wife's antique furniture collection. So it just sounds wild. Sounds really interesting. It took William Gass 30 years to write. I've only read short snippets of Gass. I've never read a whole novel from him. I do have Homesteader's Luck, which I think I'm going to try to read before I get to The Tunnel, but we'll see. I don't know, whatever. We're going to The Tunnel is the only book that I have a full plan of reading this year. So that's The Tunnel by William Gass. Also coincidentally being published by Dalkey Archive. So there you go. So this next book is written by an author. If I'm being truthful, I don't have a ton of interest in reading, and that'll be a little controversial, or people aren't, my viewers at least are gonna look at me sideways for saying that. But the book I'm talking about is You Bright and Risen Angels by William T. Vollmann. William T. Vollmann, at least in this hemisphere of the literature booktube world, is a very beloved author. He's a very interesting fellow, known for really gonzo journalism, mixing nonfiction and fiction, and writing about very, I guess the more like taboo sides of humanity. And while I do think he's a very interesting guy, based off my conversations with people who have read a lot of him, I'm not rushing to read him, except for this book, You Bright and Risen Angels, which I think is his most straightforward, sensationalist book of fiction. One of the things that interests me about this book, I think this was his first book, that he wrote this book while he was working as a programmer, I think, and he would work as a programmer throughout the day, and then overnight he would kind of hide out in his office, hide under his desk, and then when everyone left, he would write this manuscript and eat candy bars out of the vending machine. So he was writing this overnight. It is, of course, a very strange narrative about what I believe are bug/humans, I think. These bug creature humanoid things, kind of instilling a revolution against the people in power. And I think the main source of contention is electricity. That is what I remember. However, if you just, I also think that there's an element of the characters in this book being characters from a program. There is a god/programmer who writes the whole thing. I don't know. It's kind of cracked out. But what I do like about it is that there is a list of characters, kind of it's a Tolstoy book or something like that. It's very interesting. I don't know. Here's the character page. Yeah, and just one of his more straightforward works of fiction that just sounds weird enough for me to want to spend 600 pages or so reading about it. That's You Bright and Risen Angels by William T. Vollmann. The Vollmann that interests me the most, next to maybe his Seven Dreams series. That is also interesting to me. Okay, this next one I'm only going to talk about for a few minutes, if that. I ordered this book to my local bookstore. I didn't know really anything about this book other than it's held in very high regard from a lot of the authors I admire. And it was written, and it's a modernist novel. And I'm a big fan of modernism, Virginia Woolf, William Faulkner, some of my favorite writers. But again, I didn't know anything really about the book. So imagine my surprise when I walk up to the cash register, tell them my name, and they give me this thing. This is The Making of Americans by Gertrude Stein. Yeah, I mean, this is truly a behemoth. It's comically enormous. From what I understand, this is a giant modernist family saga following a couple of generations, maybe 3 generations of the same immigrant family in America, and kind of the process of them, I guess, becoming American, the making of Americans, right? I've read a couple of snippets out of this book. It's very, in a weird way, it's very surreal. The writing is so straightforward and repetitive and phrased in kind of There's so much repetition and straightforward writing that it starts to feel weird and not straightforward. It starts to like be that thing where you say the same word over and over again and it starts to feel wrong or feel weird. That's kind of like what the experience of reading the snippets out of this book is, you know. I didn't expect it to be over 1,000 pages when I picked it up, and I think it was evident on my face when I picked it up. I was like, oh, when the cashier brought it up, and the cashier's like, yeah, it's a big book. So that's The Making of Americans by Gertrude Stein. If we're being real, I'm not going to get to this one this year. If I had to pick 1,000-page book or the other 1,000-page book by Dalkey Archive, it's probably the other 1,000-page book that we talked about. But one day I'll get to it. And again, we're just talking options today. Okay, I have 2 books I want to talk about left. One of them is, I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I've spent a lot of time talking about this. In the back, it is Remembrance of Things Past, or In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. I have read maybe 100 pages or so in Swan's Way a year or 2 ago, and I was just totally intoxicated with it. The writing is so quiet and intimate and lush and beautiful that I really did feel like I was right there, like in the garden in his backyard in France, you know. So my goal is this year to read Swan's Way. Maybe I'll jump to the next one. Maybe I'll make like a 6-year project where I read 1 volume every year or something. However, I just know that writing was so intoxicating and so enchanting, and so I was just so enamored with it that it's one of those things I've been looking forward to for a long time. I'm excited to get to it this year. So that's probably between The Tunnel, A Naked Singularity, and In Search of Lost Time. That's probably the next like guaranteed read this year. Okay, and the last book I'm going to talk about before I talk about the books I've been reading lately is JR by William Gaddis. So, William Gaddis, he's like one of those authors on, the more bro-lit side of, for lack of a better term, a bro-lit side of YouTube, who's like kind of deified a little bit. Like his work, The Recognitions, is like a seminal text. And The Recognitions is a book that really interests me. However, JR is the book that kind of draws to me more, or I'm drawn to more rather. And it is about I believe a junior high school student, a 6th grader who lives on Long Island, which if you're new here, that's where I'm from, who lives on Long Island, whose goal it is to basically build an empire and scam people. I think it's supposed to be like an exploration in like capitalism in America and people's obsession with profits and wealth. And I think that like coming from Long Island and knowing a lot of like wealth obsessed people, I think this will be a really fun read. The thing about this book is it is almost entirely unattributed dialogue. I don't know if you can tell, by the way, I'm flipping through it on the screen, but it is almost entirely unattributed dialogue, which like, come on, Bill. I'm up for a challenge this year. I'm up for some challenges this year because, like I said, I'm going to be reading slowly, I'm going to be reading more deeply, and I'm going to be reading the books that call to me. And this is one of those books, and I think spending some time and really being able to pinpoint the different characters without being explicitly told who is who sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds like it might be challenging, it might be frustrating at some times, but right now it sounds like a lot of fun. And I'm thinking I want to start this, maybe if I get to it this year, I kind of want to start this over the summer. That is what's clicking with me right now, but we'll see. Also, I love this NYRB version. Oftentimes I don't love the NYRB big books because they're not super like floppy, but this one seems all right. Doesn't seem too bad. So those are the books that are like kind of on the smorgasbord or possibilities that I want to read. I want to talk to you incredibly quickly for my standards about the books I'm reading now. First one is Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon. I think I'm like 300 or so pages in right now. I took a little break over December as work got really insane because it was hard to do a whole day of work and then come back and read some of this. However, I'll say a very charming book, very dense book, but in an interesting way, a very heartwarming book. I'm only 300 pages in. I'm sure it'll get more so as we go through. But the budding friendship of these two very different people, Mason and Dixon, it's a totally surreal and non-realistic book, but the friendship that is built between these two people is incredibly realistic. And it reminds me about a lot of my friendships with people I have back at home. The different things that make them anxious, how they express that anxiety, how they calm each other down, how they sometimes don't know what to say to each other. It's really great. It's really heartwarming. Also, the language, the prose, come on, it's amazing, it's immaculate, it's beautiful. It took like 200 or so pages to get like really used to the 17th or the 18th century style of prose. But once you get used to it, it's really rewarding. It's really rewarding. It's a really good time. So, so that's the first big book I'm reading, Mason and Dixon. I'm reading this quite slowly with my cousin. We're doing like 5 chapters a week. So it's going to be maybe like two or so more months before I'm properly finished with this book. The next book I'm reading, I've also talked about before on the channel. Yeah, it's a book I picked up on the whim at my local bookstore. It is a book I had not heard about, but I'm so glad I picked it up because it is so good. This book is so good. And that book, I've talked about it before here, but it's Lies and Sorcery by Elsa Morante. It is another family saga written from the perspective of the youngest woman in the family, whose name is Elisa, different from Elsa. And it's kind of her way of exorcising her demons or talking about her long familial history, and kind of telling the reader, who she talks to directly, about how she became who she is. And she starts 3 generations back. Or I guess it's 2 generations back. She starts with her grandmother. And the best way I can sell you this novel is this book is if the smartest person wrote an 800-page diary relentlessly talking shit about anyone she's ever met. It's so fun. It is so good. I think a lot of this is it is a statement about wealth disparity in Italy at the time. This takes place in Sicily. I think it was either right before or right after the rise of fascism in Italy. And this takes place in Sicily. And there's a lot of very deliberate wealth disparity setups and how that affects the mindsets of both the wealthy and both the poor characters in this book, and how it's kind of like a poisonous mindset for both of them. But that's only part of the allure to this book. Really, the allure of this book is the narrator inserting herself, making things up and being totally unreliable, but also just being so funny and smart and just being sarcastic and nasty to all the characters in this book. There is not a single lovable character in this book, but you just can't stop reading about them. It is so good. I cannot recommend this book enough. I'm about halfway through, and this has been my nighttime book, so I kind of pick it up at night, read 20, 30 pages, and move on with my life. That's Lies and Sorcery. It's great. The last one I'm reading is part of a book club, an in-person book club out here in Nashville. We are reading 1 part per month, so it's a very, very long book club, but that is, of course, it's Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I always thought the first Tolstoy book I was going to read was going to be War and Peace. Just because, people call it like one of the greatest works of art in human history, like very alluring selling point there. But I was invited to a book club by one of my friends at work. She was like, we're reading 1 part a month. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll join in. And this book is awesome. This book is so much fun. Reading this book is like watching a TV show. I thought, Leo Tolstoy, Russian literature, it's going to be dense. It's going to be, hard to read. There's going to be a lot to digest and unpack. And yes, certainly there's a lot of a lot of philosophy, a lot to digest and unpack in this book, but it is incredibly easy to read. The characters are interesting and lovable, and you just want to know what happens next. This is the translation by, I don't know if it's Pevier and Volokhonsky. And I didn't love their translation of Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, but for Tolstoy, it's working out quite well. I actually am enjoying this translation quite a bit. Something I am noticing the difference between, Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, which I'm not an expert. I've read one Dostoevsky book, and this is my first Tolstoy. But Tolstoy is much more person forward. You get all these little details of what these characters do that make them individuals. And like one of them is like, one thing I'm thinking about is like, he talks about how like one of the characters was getting really worked up and she starts really violently gesticulating with her hands. And that's what she does when she gets really frustrated. I was just really able to see that. I was really able to envision that in my head. And that's like more character work in one sentence than you get in a whole Dostoevsky book. I'm kidding, but only kind of. Okay, so that's 2026, year of the big book. That's what we're getting this year. Tell me if you've read any of these books. Tell me if any of them are interesting to you. Tell me if they sound like total garbage to you. I hope not. I think they all seem pretty interesting, but what are you gonna do? Everyone's got different tastes. Thanks so much for stopping by, and thanks so much for watching. My New York Knicks have been slipping. Tough couple of weeks for the New York Knicks, but we'll bounce back. And yeah, I mean, that's the last thing I want to say, I guess. Okay, I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.